Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. What I'm going to be talking a bit about, well, first let me introduce myself. My name is Travis Brown. I'm a professor at Indiana University. I teach a number of things, technology innovation, technology entrepreneurship, but one of the classes I teach is design strategy, as well as an additional class in product management. So I'm sort of in the middle of all these conversations about technology and engineering and design and business and where all this plays together. And one of the conversations that has come up over the years is how do designers better position themselves within their organizations to be taken seriously in strategic conversations? That's what I'm going to be talking about today. I ran a workshop earlier in the week, and then we'll have Q&A at the tail end of this if you have any interest in continuing the conversation. So the question that comes up quite a bit, maybe not so much from designers, although this is a conversation I have with designers in my classes, really what is design about? What does it entail? There's a lot of debate depending on your focus in design about what is the essence of design. I like this quote that really just defines it as shaping an experience. That's very broad, but I think it, at least for me, perfectly captures what design is. But a conversation that we have when it comes to strategic conversations is really what does design mean for an organization? I mean, depending on your perspective, you may not like this quote, but I think what it really tries to speak to is that if you're not contextualizing your designs in respect to the organizational constraints and considerations and the goals of your organization, then you're not having a strategic conversation. All too often when I've worked with my students over the years, it's been the case that when we're teaching students in graduate programs in design, there's a tendency to feel as if in your effort as a designer to serve your intended audience, that your organization becomes an impediment. It's really standing in the way of the value you might otherwise provide. And so organizations, certainly leadership within organizations, start to have this sense that designers are a little bit removed from the reality of what the organization is trying to achieve. And so you see numerous authors, thinkers in the space talking about how designers are seeking the seat at the strategic decision-making table. And the question then, of course, becomes, what is it that's standing in the way of design doing that? And how might we facilitate designers having that voice? So design thinking became, and I'm sure you've heard this term at this point in time, it's been heavily popularized, that design was attempting to elevate itself as a profession and focus more on design thinking. So much so that I would have design students say to me, well, I'm not so much a designer, I'm really a design thinker. And I'd say, what does that mean? Because it begs the question, I'm around engineering students too, and I never had an engineering student tell me I'm an engineering thinker or I'm a business thinker. I never had that happen. So then it's started to beg the question, okay, why is this so popular? What was driving it? I'm sure you've seen this from the Stanford D School, that this design thinking framework. The problem that came out of this framework, at least as I see it, as much as it did to some degree enable designers to free themselves from, if you would like to think of it that way. I mean, if you're more focused on interaction design and interface design, maybe you don't like the notion of freeing yourself from aesthetic considerations. But for a lot of designers, that's precisely what they're trying to do, sort of elevate the profession to a more strategic realm. And they saw design thinking as enabling them to do that. But the challenge came in the fact that, as Bruce Nussbaum said back in 2011, design through the design thinking movement started to be sort of just boiled down to a rote process. It was linear, it was sequential, it was stepwise. I would go to conferences, a lot of professional conferences where design executives were lamenting the fact that they were being asked to run design thinking workshops, and what was taken from that was not a deeper appreciation for design. What was taken from that was instead this notion that, oh, that's all design is? Got it, I can do that too. Step one, step two, step three, and I too am a designer or design thinker, depending on how you use those terms. What became more problematic as I saw it, and I would teach my grad design students this, I had taught a lot of MBA students who were now calling themselves design thinkers on LinkedIn. And I'd say, okay, if you're a design thinker and they're a design thinker, where does this position you in your own organization? So this led to Bruce Nussbaum making this statement that design thinking is dead. That was over. Well, that was 10 years ago and people are still talking about it, so I'm not so sure that it's dead. But I would say that what he was speaking to here is more the fact that as a movement for designers, or at least as an effective movement for designers in the elevation of design as a profession, that movement was dead. So I'm tossing around a lot of books here that I've used in my classes over the years. But what I like about this statement is that it really emphasizes that designers must first know who they are. That's a question that comes up a lot when I'm having this conversation. Because in the end, I'd say that the beauty of this statement, which comes from an entirely different book, but it really speaks to the fact that deep consumer understanding is at the heart of strategy discussions. And if strategy is an integrated set of choices and it's about creating a sustainable competitive advantage, when we're talking about strategic design or design strategy, if you prefer that term instead, what we're talking about is enabling designers to be positioning their designs in the context of the organization. Now, the challenge of doing that is that design is by its very nature a fuzzy, nuanced endeavor. You're dealing with human experience by its very nature. I would argue that human experience is irreducible. So if you start to get into conversations about we need to make design operationally efficient, or we need to make a dollars and cents argument about every design decision, I say that's problematic. It's a slippery slope for design as a profession. I get into that more here in a moment. You'll see papers out there on design strategy. This graphic here doesn't, in my opinion, tell me all that much outside of the fact that it says, hey, there's some business stuff going on, there's some design stuff going on, and somewhere in the blending of those two things lies design strategy. That doesn't really tell you all that much, and it certainly doesn't tell you enough to teach a class, I can assure you. I speak from experience. So the key here, though, is that when it comes to design strategy, and in all my research, speaking with professional design strategists, they would tell me one thing consistently, and that is this, that design strategy, or strategic design versus traditional design, if you will, has to do with not just following the brief, but helping construct the brief, which is to say that you're helping think about where the brief should exist within the organization and helping define what the goals are for that organization, specifically in respect to the design that you're about to bring to fruition. This is the idea behind this. That, even though for the most part, when I was speaking with professional design strategists, is the one consistent thread that I had throughout those conversations. It kept coming back to a strategic designer needs to be able to create the brief, not just follow the brief. So what did that mean? Well, this is something that I had written a paper for the Design Management Institute, but this is just really meant to be a conceptual framework, trying to help my design students we go through case studies where I'd say, okay, if this is a failed design, let's debalance that and bring it back to what you might think of as an ideal design as a designer. And I could get into this deeper in the Q&A. In the interest of time, I'll move on. But then getting them comfortable with a conversation about what I started to call strategic balancing, as opposed to the connotation of a compromise or whittling down of a design. That certainly isn't well received, but the notion of strategically balancing a design through considerations like competitive advantage, or what's the competitive landscape, all these considerations that go into strategy for an organization is really what I've been teaching students to do for the last 6 years. But it comes back to the question of retaining the essence of design. I'll have professional designers say to me when I get into these conversations with them, well, that's not true to design. If you're going to tell me that something is true or not true to something, then that suggests to me that you have a sense of what that is. And yet, oftentimes people will struggle to tell me exactly what is design and what we're trying to retain in respect to design as a profession. So I won't spend a lot of time on this, but there are key considerations that I walk students through that I think, let me step back for a moment. I think the key here is, well, certainly for me, as I've presented it to my students, is to introduce strategic tools in business that enable design students to think qualitatively about strategy as opposed to just going through a hyper analytical deterministic focus, which to me is not true to design as a profession. So we deal with SWOT analyses and other things like that, which I'll touch on here in a moment. Because as I love this quote from Jeff Bezos, you can't put into a spreadsheet how people are going to behave around a new product. I believe that wholeheartedly. And so to try designers trained into thinking that they should cram all their design decisions into an Excel spreadsheet, I think is incredibly problematic and frankly, anathema to design. But we still get back to this question: good design versus successful designs. I used to have a lot of my students, well, they still do, but they would enter competitions against business students or law students. And I'd see these, especially my business pitch competitions. I teach a lot of entrepreneurship students. And they'd come to me and say, I don't get it. I put forth this proposal. I follow my design process. I feel confident that it was a good design. And I'll tell them, I said, I don't doubt that. Yeah, I can see it's, beautifully thought through. You've done your user research. I can see the decisions, the rationales you have for it. It's evident to me that you're quite mindful of those you're endeavoring to serve. And yet you weren't thinking about the competitive landscape. You didn't look at the branding as it relates to what already exists in the market. None of these other business considerations, the strategy around launching what you're proposing, are there or evident to anyone. And so, while it might be good, it stands far less of a chance of being successful, at least as a viable business. So back to this other book, Dave Holston, The Strategic Designer. Most clients don't understand what is good or bad design. And that's part of the problem that I see designers having in their organizations, is that it feels like we can't articulate the value of design. And I've had some professionals tell me, what's the magic of design? Or they're reluctant to even get into a conversation about the value they provide for fear of not really having a clear answer. And unfortunately, I won't be able to give you one today either. It's more of a discussion, but there are approaches for this. I'm more inclined to try to get designers to think, when it comes to success metrics in respect to shifts in attitude or brand perception or things that are, again, more not subjective as much as they are qualitative, right? More speaking to behavioral shifts or attitudes about a brand. Certainly you can measure purchasing decisions, but while some books will go so far as to say that designers need to put everything that they propose into a dollars and cents argument, I think there are ways to go about putting forth proposals that are truer to design, which I, again, could get into. I use frameworks like marketing 4Ps just to get designers into the mindset of, it's not just, the user experience you're creating isn't just about the product you designed. It is also about pricing strategy. It is also about distribution. And although I know some designers, design friends who don't really take kindly to the notion that promotion and advertising and all that have a huge impact on the way they go about launching the product or the way their target audience is going to perceive it, the reality is that it has a tremendous impact. I also try to work with my students on understanding that, just because we have to think about profitability doesn't mean you should turn a blind eye to the impact on the planet or society. This is typically a tough conversation with my early students because they think as soon as I start to talk about profitability, I want them to eschew any concern for society, which is certainly not what I'm advocating for here. This is everything I said, so I'll just jump past this slide. I'm just about right on time. There are frameworks out there that, this is from the strategic design book, that talk about design strategy, that look at it from that perspective, but they're still highly conceptual. I think our time is best spent trying to think about how to strategically position design within organizations. That's what I ran the workshop on this week. And that's what I have a lot of professionals in industry contact me about, helping them think through not just how to construct strategic design briefs, but actually more existentially, more at a macro level, how to position design as a function within their organizations. to put that forth to their leadership teams to get them to see design as a critically important strategic resource within their respective organization. So that is it for my 15 minutes. And this is who I am. Again, my name is Travis. And if you have any questions or would like to follow this up, you're always welcome to email me. But beyond that,